Maybe a slightly different perspective for everybody this morning, but I'm Sophie Copley. I'm the co-founder and chief product officer at Little Journey, and today I'd just like to talk to you really about my little journey through human-centered design. In terms of the sort of founding team at Little Journey, there's two of us. There's myself. By background, I'm a design engineer, and I've taken a specialist interest in human-centered design, specifically within healthcare. And my co-founder is Dr. Chris Evans. He's an anaesthetic doctor by background and a specialist in perioperative anxiety with children. The problem that Little Journey is trying to solve, and the problem that we were faced with at the very start, was that up to 75% of children will face significant anxiety before a healthcare procedure. In this case, we're mostly talking about surgery. This isn't only shocking because of the stat, it's quite a high percentage, 75%, but also because of the anxiety that's being faced. It isn't just a sort of flutter of the heart like the anxiety I might feel right now presenting to you lovely people, but actually it's that the breakdown, significant anxiety that they're facing. And when we looked into the research and we were doing a lot of observation work, which I'll tell you about in a minute, we found that the real problem here was that children essentially just weren't told what's going on. They don't know what to expect when they arrive. And actually, through the observation work that I was doing, I've watched a lot of children go through surgery. It's very traumatic. Wouldn't recommend it if you don't have to. Right into the surgery, into the theatre and everything. Don't do it. And yeah, essentially, this child was turning up, in hospital with the parents, and grandma was also there before COVID. And the child turned up in school uniform. That child had been told, hey, let's get in the car, we're going to go to school in your uniform. And then, whoops, surprise, you're in hospital. Imagine, even as a human being, somebody tell me we're going somewhere and all of a sudden I'm going for a procedure. Not cool. So yeah, the child, they don't know what's going on most of the time, and all the information that's out there is not tailored really towards them. Again, I'll show you soon. If you don't know what's going on, that means when you arrive in this unfamiliar place, you're uncertain. You don't know what to expect, you don't know what's going to happen. And this leads to anxiety, and for children who maybe don't know how to quell their anxiety or calm themselves in that situation, they'll express that in any way that they find fit. So that anxiety sometimes shows up as refusing to do what you want them to do, crying, screaming, trying to run away, whatever that situation might be. And ultimately that leads to poor compliance within healthcare and worse outcomes. So now imagine, I don't know, a month down the line, the child needs to go for a repeat procedure. Imagine how that experience might be if they've already tried to run away or they're refusing to do anything. I'm really sorry that this isn't showing up, but it actually says that 25% of children will be physically restrained during induction, that 50% of those children will face negative behavioural changes up to 2 weeks after the procedure. So that'll be things like bedwetting, nightmares, separation anxiety. And the per on the day cancellation, it actually costs £1,200 in the NHS, just if a child's too anxious to show up on the day, or they have to be sent home because they're just expressing their anxiety in a way that they feel fit. Yeah, they get sent home, that costs instantly, boom, £1,200 of wasted resources. I wouldn't show you a problem if I didn't have a solution, not today. Essentially, Little Journey is a mobile application and a back-end platform where we tell the children, in a way that they understand before they arrive, what's going to happen. They can look around the rooms, experience a virtual tour, interact with characters, play some games to calm down, understand breathing techniques if they're feeling anxious, and essentially prepare themselves so that we can enhance the engagement when they arrive in hospital, reduce that anxiety, and ultimately have better outcomes. So rather than something being a scary situation, maybe it's a little bit, maybe a little bit of anxiety, but ultimately an all right day in the end, and maybe if they do have to go back for that visit again in a month's time, it won't be such a traumatic thing. We have a back-end system that clinicians can log into, configure all the content, tailor it. It's all very modular to be able to configure the content to their care and how they like to do things in their hospital. That includes overseas. And then on the patient side, free to download and access the nearest hospital. So the foundations of our product and essentially the business is mostly human-centered design and then the science and evidence that backs that up. When it comes to our human-centered design approach, we really focus on a child-first approach. So we put them at the centre of the design process, as you can see in my diagram. And then around that, we pack around the sort of experiences and all the research with the family and social network, getting them involved, then the healthcare professionals, and then the other stakeholders. And what we find is that in the healthcare sector, This doesn't tend to be the situation. In fact, I would say it's almost the exact reverse, where children are often just come last. And when I think about the experience that I've had and understanding why children are potentially left out of this picture, because it seems so obvious. And when I stepped into this space, I was thinking, like, why is nobody listening to these kids, and why is nobody building something that looks like it's for children? And really I was thinking about, it's easier to speak to adults and parents. So if you are building something, people find it's a default. We go to speaking to adults and like-minded people. They're also a vulnerable group of people, so the children, poorly children in hospital, it's quite difficult. Sometimes people might get a little bit scared, like, I don't really know if I can go speak to that child. Do I need to get permission? How do we do this? People also really assume that children are unable to provide good insights. I don't know how many parents we've got in the room, but I'd say they're pretty opinionated. And also people assume that they're unable to communicate or understand, but actually from the research that I do and the children that I speak to, I'd say they really do get it, and they sometimes get it better than adults do. Also, lack of data from children, so we don't tend to, it's really not a good practice, I would say, collect data from children and start analysing that. So it's just not available for people to understand that there's even a problem there in the first place. And finally, my absolute pet peeve is that people assume that children are just little adults. And within healthcare, this is such a big thing. So they sort of like start with the adult solution and then go, oh, we'll just put some pictures in it, we'll make it colourful, or we'll change the language slightly. And it's just not the same. It's just, they're a different breed. So breaking it down into my human-centred design journey, I've got 3 sort of phases. The first phase is when we were founding the business. I'll tell you the story and show you how I sort of went around human-centred design, or tried to at that stage. The second phase is, oh my God, what have we done? That was the phase when I left my job and decided to go Little Journey full-time, also during a pandemic, risk. And then finally to the moon and beyond, which is our partnership now with Lego and the human-centred design aspects with Play. Sorry for the boring slide, but phase 1, in finding our feet. So the scenario that we had was both in London at the time. We were both working full-time. Chris would do 24-hour shifts in the hospital, and I would go down there with my 2013 MacBook Pro, overheating on my lap, sitting on the wards, and I would just be observing around me, like figuring out what's going on and creating the MVP of the Little Journey. I also work full-time, but in a big FMCG company, so often finishing work quite late and picking up the laptop in the evenings as well. We had 0.5 of a person on the team because there was about a quarter of me and a quarter of Chris. The key challenges, we had no resources, no money, barely any time, a limited network, and no team. Positives were that it was easy to access the hospital because we were just sitting in it, which was brilliant, and people were walking by, patients Chris was still dealing with, so we had a really great opportunity there, and I still almost wish we had that opportunity now because it was just really quick to validate and get ideas. And the third positive, which is Chris was a charming doctor, and I was your friendly neighbourhood northerner ready to come in and help with any problems. It's true, and I'll tell you why in a second. The outcomes were the MVP of Little Journey. We made and validated it with the children and families around us. The early customers that we made without a commercial team, so people just got word and it started spreading, all the nurses and doctors moving around. Oh, have you heard of this? They're doing this, they're doing that. We had no sales personality and we still managed to get some customers. And early validation research trials were being kicked off to understand, like, if we did this, could we actually make a difference? I'm so sorry about the colour contrast. I will not do that ever again. Ever. This is my first time. So our human-centred design approach, the key activities, I will read them one by one. Observation work in hospital environments. So when I was there, Chris is obviously there as well with a new lens now, and we're doing a lot of observation and working with those friendly doctors and nurses. Leaving interactive stations in hospital playrooms and waiting areas. So I couldn't be there. I was working full time. I can't sit there all the time and be that designer researcher that I'd love to have been at the time. So what could I do that would, children are waiting for hours sometimes if they're last on the list. What can I do to maybe engage them? So I had to set up like stations or little voting corners and ask the nurses, tell you what, if a child's bored or you need to take them away from the bed for a little bit, why not take them over here and answer my question, put a sticker on the board? And they were really good like that. They'd engage. It's really not a problem. They're very busy, but also the child's off their hands. And then finally, like colouring competitions, anything I could get little feedback or little designs off the kids. interviews and group workshops as standard. The key takeouts, if you don't ask, you don't get. So that charming, friendly neighbourhood northerner, we did get really far just by asking. If you've got no like resources or no money, sometimes people are just really nice, and if you explain why you're here and you can get some doors opened, it was just really beneficial for us. The second one was immerse yourself, similar to the conversation we just had. It was the most valuable thing for me, to be immersed in that environment and really seeing the problems as they were sort of arriving in front of me, and how I was going to design for that. Yeah, and as I put here, I was even disguised as a doctor with a clipboard, so scrubs on, clipboard in hand, walking into the, I had permission, walking into the surgeries and seeing what was going on. Finally, you don't have to be there to facilitate. So if you're short on time or you've got other things that you need to do, you can make something interactive and let people just freely engage with it and see what comes back. Phase 2, oh my God, what have we done? This is just me. Really, in a human-centered design, in a virtual world during a pandemic, the scenario was just internal screaming for a long time. The whole world was completely turned upside down, and the healthcare sector was really under pressure at this time. So we were probably working in a really difficult space to try and create a product. So do you know what we did? We kind of just stopped and slowed down and let them do what they needed to do. And instead, we offered our services in any way that we could. So I'll explain a little bit as we go along. But Chris was still a clinician. He was also volunteering to work at the Nightingale, if you remember what all that was. I left my cushy corporate job just before the pandemic, and we both moved out of London, so now we weren't even in the same space. We were 1.1 people. I was 1, and Chris was just trying whenever he could. The key challenges, the healthcare doors completely closed, as I mentioned. The clinicians, I'm not even going to go there. They were so busy, and I had so much sympathy for them. The patient appointments were also cancelled. So those that weren't having the sort of urgent life-saving surgeries were put on a back burner and added to the list. Moving into the virtual world, which I'm sure you guys remember, we're kind of in it now, although I still get the "you're on mute" still from time to time. We had very little money, and we were shifting direction. The positives was that we still found a way to help the children in a time of crisis, and we had some time to set up the business and create an investment pitch deck and a strategy, so we took a bit of a step back. But when we did help, we partnered with NHS Digital to create a COVID-19 swab pathway in the application and co-create with children, like frequently asked question explainer videos. So these kids were obviously in the middle of a pandemic. All the adults were talking about it, almost like above them. All the adults were talking about the pandemic and what was going on and the impacts of this. And the kids, some of the stories I've heard, children washing their hands in toilets because they just think whenever they see water now, they just need to wash their hands and get in there. Like these really odd little traumas that are coming out from the kids, and nobody was telling them really what was going on in a way that they would understand. So we said, hey, we're a Little Journey, we tell children what's going on in a way that they understand. And NHS Digital said, yes, please. So we worked with the kids, asked them, what questions do you want to know? What answers do you need? What's going on? Do you understand what coronavirus is? And we had over 700,000 views on YouTube Kids as well with that content. Meanwhile as well, the investment pitch and the strategy really paid off. We received $1.5 million funding and landed a $1.6 million global deal as well. Stupid idea. In this, key activities were entirely virtual, letting the children ask us questions so we could find the answers and understanding those knowledge gaps by doing so. And instead of being able to interact with children only, we had to really lean on parents in this situation as well. We weren't as sort of free as we would be in the workshops. Virtual voting and virtual storytelling. The key takeouts, let your users start with questions. So if you're trying to understand the role that you're playing in this problem solving, let them lead. Give your user a role as well. So this was really key for us. If you give them a role in your, in this case it was sort of research design, let them know the part they're playing and how they're having the impact on that solution. And finally, virtual interviews and conferences are great, but they cannot be solely relied on. So our human-centered design really took a hit here, and it was so different and so strange. But thank goodness for Miro, Zoom, and virtual prototyping. And finally, phase 3, to the moon and beyond, I hope. So the scenario is that now we've got a team. We're able to start creating a culture and process around that human-centered design and start building those principles. We're allowed to play outside again, so that's lovely. And we can be in rooms like this, which is also lovely. And we're using all of the learnings from our last 2 phases to improve the ways of working. We have just over 23 people, planning on being a few more, I think, this year. The key challenges now have really changed. So we've got this internal red tape. we're a responsible company, we must be very responsible, which is totally acceptable. Spending a lot of time on discovery, so we just love doing the discovery now, and it's really hard to rein the team in. And finally, lots of time finding the feet as a team, so lots of new people, new processes, trying to figure out, is this the right way, etc. The positives, we've got a really wide and more diverse network now. We've got the ability to run multiple projects, which we didn't have before, and the ability to support more children in a more meaningful way with new perspectives shaping our mindset. The outcomes are, we've got the partnership with the LEGO Foundation and also NASON, which is the National Association of Special Educational Needs. We're creating a new, more inclusive product with these guys and adding more play and better support for those on the fringes. And more global contracts have been secured to support more children worldwide. We actually have a mission to support 1 million children to better health by 2025. The key activities, again, really sorry for the font. Plays a universal language for all children, and I actually also believe that it could be a universal language for all adults as well. It really does unlock a few things, and now we've brought more play into our workshops, it's completely transformed the way that we work. We have a Little Journey Young Designers group, so we're building a group of children who can actively engage in iterations of new features and start becoming part of the team. We go to schools and families workshops, co-design sessions, play meetups in the home, so we're now going into their environment more and more after I said the value of actually immersing yourself in their environment, and working with neurodivergent first to build a more inclusive product, which I think really ties into what Andy was saying with the no average user, and I have a slide if I have time at the end, which I'd really like to show you from the National Association of Special Educational Needs on like how to start with the edge first. So the first key takeout is let people know the impact and contribution they'll have. You'll get more valuable insights by just saying you're part of this and you're going to make a difference, and they'll unlock a few doors in their brain for that. So give them that purpose and engage with them to understand the possibilities of their contribution. Second is play is key to unlock rapport. So not only does play break down the barriers, but it builds that rapport and helps gain the trust. And we've had a lot of workshops this week actually. I've been in St Albans doing some. And one of the children, after like building a little bit of rapport and playing a game with Lego with him, you could see he was sat on a pillow, a little cushion over there, and as we played more, he just got closer and closer, and then he was like telling me secrets and all these things that he'd been doing at home and all of, and you just really unlock the kid through play, and it's just been invaluable and also heartwarming to work with these kids. And finally, focus on the fringes to make it inclusive. So we've learned that inclusive design is engaging with the fringes and considering them from day one. And the way that we're thinking about it now is working with the neurodivergent children first to then sort of look in at the rest, because if you build something that's inclusive from their perspective, then it's most likely that other people can use it too. Final slides, promise. So this one's just on the sort of user roles and the impact, and I've got sort of a scale here from high involvement to low involvement and the different profiles, and I'm sure there's more, but I'll just give you 4 for today. The first one is design partner. So get your users involved as design partners from the get-go and bring them on that journey with you. They'll get so much more out of it rather than just a one-off session here and there. An informant would be somebody that's more involved through opinions and prototypes, but not necessarily knowing the whole story or picture. Tester, I think we probably have experienced this quite a lot, but open-ended, just testing those prototypes and giving the insights, maybe just collecting the data on that. And then a user, this is essentially barely any involvement besides using the product. It's very passive with predefined tasks and little active engagement. And I'd just say today, I'd encourage you, it's been so invaluable getting all these little young design partners involved. It's invaluable for us. I'd really recommend, if you can, with your users, give it a go. And just to make sure that I'm not completely talking rubbish to you all day, I thought I'd put a slide on proofs in the pudding to justify my seat here. So just through word of mouth, we've had 71% engagement. We've reduced that anxiety by 32%. We're improving the patient outcomes. So if a child's particularly anxious when they arrive, or actually even worse, if they're diagnosed as neurodivergent, it's most likely they'll get a sedative to just sort of, push them through the journey on the conveyor belt. We've reduced that need by 22%. We've reduced those cancellations that cost that £1,200 by 42%. Children are in the recovery room less, possibly because they know that they need to go for a wee, have a bite of a sandwich and have a drink before they can leave. Reduce the fasting times as well, so that increased compliance, not only for the children, but also there's parent content in the application, because we know the parents are the gatekeepers of all this information, and also anxious parent, equals anxious child in most cases. And finally, for the organisations, this is just within the NHS, for every £1 invested, they get £3.50 cash releasing, and there's a further £6 societal benefit for every £1 invested in Little Journey. And from a user perspective, so I mentioned at the start that 25% of children will be physically restrained during induction. The anaesthetic room is by far the most anxiety-inducing. That's where all the needles and all the invasive bits happen, and then you fall asleep. And actually in this feedback, I won't read all of it, but it's just this bit here, where he literally ran into the sleep room, the sort of term that we use with the kids for anaesthetic room, climbed onto the chair and sat happily playing a game, excited to be in the room that he'd seen on the app so many times. And I'm just thinking, you know, as a founder of this business, having such an impact on even one family makes my life so worthwhile. So the final key takeouts: if you have limited resources, if you don't ask, you don't get it. Immerse yourself in any way that you can. It's also often not very expensive if you can just get in somewhere and sit as a fly on the wall. You don't have to be there to facilitate. In a virtual world, maybe let your users start with the questions if you're trying to figure out these problems, and start that conversation as well. Give your user a role, and virtual interviews and conferences can work, but they should not be solely relied on. And in design and play, let people know the impact of their contribution. Play is key to unlocking rapport, and focus on the fringes to make it inclusive.